All right, here we go. So today I'm gonna do a bit of a live coding through the module about what's it called exactly? Do posting data to the server with a form. Let me share my screen here. Okay, should all be able to see that. So this is the module we're going to be working through. I haven't written any code up for this ahead of time, so I'm literally going to do this from scratch as you're watching. So there may be a little bit of Googling or fumbling on my part, but hopefully that'll just give you a better idea of my true process. Please stop and ask questions as we go, either in the chat, which I'm going to try and keep open here so I'll see it, or unmute and shout at me. So let's get going. So I'm looking through this module, and there's exercises down at the bottom here, which is what we're going to be focused on here. So part one is a treehouse exercise about using templates with Express. I'm gonna skip over that, and we're gonna work on part two, which is building a basic web app using Express, which can send data to the server via an HTML form element. So we're going to be creating a form get page that has a form on it, and a form post page that has the same form on it. The only difference between the forms is that one form uses a get request when the form is submitted, and the other one uses a post request. And then both of them are going to submit to the same URL, submit form, and are going to return some JSON, just printing out what the body params and the query params are. So, so to start with, before we start actually writing any code, I want to talk a little bit about get requests versus post requests, or another way to say that would be HTTP requests with an action of get versus those with an action of post. And to illustrate this, I'm going to use a tool that I've used before in either office hours or a lecture or both, called Netcat. I've got a lecture on our YouTube channel about the HTTP protocol. And I use Netcat a bit in there. If you haven't seen that lecture, that might be of interest to you. I can, well, I'll just post a link now instead of telling you I'll do it later, because I may forget later. So let's look at that here. So somewhere in here, there is, this was a little while back. Promises for name conventions. Relational database. Wow, we've done a lot of videos. So it's back a little ways. It was right before this one. There it is, raw HTTP. That's the one. There's my face again. So this, thank you, Fode. Yeah. And there's the link. So that might be of interest if you haven't seen this before. But basically what Netcat is going to allow me to do is open up a server on any port. So let me open up the server on port 8888. And I'm doing that wrong. I'll host. Oh. There we go. -L for listen. So now I have a server that is just listening for TCP connections on port 8888. And what that means is if I tell my browser to fetch a page at that, using that port, my browser will send the typical GET request it would send to anything else, but it'll send it to this Netcat process, and Netcat will just print out exactly what it receives over the TCP connection. So if I do a request for the puppies path, we can see exactly what our browser sends as part of its HTTP request, right? So the first line is get, and then /puppies, the route that it's looking for, and then the version of the HTTP protocol that it's using. And then these other lines here are headers, right? There's a header that specifies the host, some stuff about the connection, the user agent that's being used, which refers to the browser. This is sort of information about the browser itself. And then what kind of content it will accept and encodings that it understands and other things. So what we see here is we see get, the path, and then some headers, and then nothing. And you can see my browser here is just spinning, waiting for some response. And I can actually send things back over this connection by just typing in this form, I believe. And here's the response is not a valid HTTP response. So the browser freaks out at me, and we'll get an error saying invalid HTTP response. But this gives you an idea of what a GET requests look like in HTTP. HTTP, at least for the time being, is a text-based protocol, so it's pretty easy to just look at and understand as a human, at least easier than binary protocols. So let's start up that server again. So the other thing we could do is a post request. Let's see what that would look like. To do a post request, we're going to need a, well, there's a couple ways to do this, but an easy way is to just create a form, and that'll give us an idea. So let's just create a form.html. That's just going to be a simple page that has a form on it. That has input named color. Let's say we're asking, let's be simpler. So we're going to input your age. Okay, so we're going to have a header, and then we're going to have a form with an age input. And this is not intended to be a tutorial on how to write good HTML. We're just doing sort of the bare minimum here to get
Trevor,
a working
you have a typo
form.
on mine.
I have a typo. Yes. Oh, I see it. Thank you. Is that what you were thinking? You mean the tags have to match? So picky. Okay, so let's open this form in the browser here. There we go. We should probably have a submit button on this thing. Does that work? Let's see. That does not work. Input type. Shows you how long it's been since I've written an HTML form from scratch. There we go. Okay, so we've got an input and we've got a submit button in our form, right? So this is what a basic HTML form looks like. And the last thing we're going to add to our form is a target. So if we look at the specification for forms from Mozilla Developer Network, which is kind of my preferred place to go for documentation, you see it's got all these attributes, and one of them is action, which is the URI of a program that processes the form information. So it's just like the URL on the internet to send the information to from the form to, right? So we can set that to http://localhost 8888, right? Which will send it to this Netcat process that we're going to run. So Netcat listen at localhost 8888. We got our form set up to submit to that location. So let's see what happens here. If I put in my age is 111 and submit, absolutely nothing happens. Let's open the inspector and see what went wrong. Network. Submit. There it goes. Okay, so what we're seeing here is, oh, hang on. New action. The override by the form action. The button. Interesting. Did I misspell action? No, I did not. All right. So let's do this just to be thorough. And then let's add a path on here to make sure that that's not the problem. Form submit. We might not have reloaded this page recently enough. Here we go. That goes nowhere because my Netcat's not listening. Let's try this one more time. There we go. All right, so here's what a post request looks like. So see, the start of it looks a lot like a GET request, except that instead of GET, it says post. It still has the path that's being referenced in our form, right? So it's just like a GET, you know, we're getting a URL. So we have a path here, we've got a host, we've still got all of these headers. And then below the headers, there's a blank line, and then there's some more text. And this down here, everything below the headers is the body of the HTTP request. So here we've got the headers, and down here we have more text, and the text is the body. And the body, when you post a form, is built by taking all the inputs of the form and using what's called URI encoding to sort of encode them into the body. And so you can see it's a really simple encoding, right? It's just the name of the input with an equal sign and then the value for that input. So if we added more inputs to this form, zip code, and let's do one more called name. If we start this over, now we've got 3 inputs, and we can say go 111 for the age, zip code's going to be 27713, and name would be monster. So now we can see all these things get strung together in this string in the body, where we have the name of the input, and then the value, and then one of these ampersands, and then the next input, name equals value, ampersand, name equals value. You can see that spaces here are being treated special. They're getting replaced by a plus sign. So there's no, like, spaces aren't valid in this encoding. They get kind of escaped by the plus sign. So that's what a post versus a GET looks like. So there's the post, and if we, just for reference here, if we change this to GET and start up this server again, go back to our form again and submit the same thing, 27713 monster. So the GET looks very similar, but all of that information from the form, instead of being put down here on the body, gets added on to the path of the URL that we're seeing. So you can see this format is exactly the same, this URI encoding, right? But instead of being stuck in the body, this stuff gets stuck here in the URL itself after a question mark. So this part of a URL is generally referred to as like URL parameters. And it's just one of two different ways you can send a bunch of like key value pairs to a path in a HTTP request. Any questions about that before we move on to actually writing some code? No? Okay, cool. So now that we get an idea of what the client is doing and what these different requests look like, we're going to write a server that will display these two different types of forms, one with a get and one with a post. And we're going to write a endpoint that will receive like both of those things. So let's go into I know I have a folder for this open already. HTML forms. HTML forms. Okay. So we go in here. Right now all we have is this HTML thing. So let's npm init, create some sort of a, oh man. Okay, so now we've got a package.json, and we'll create a index.html. Well, first we're going to need to install some stuff, right? So we know we're going to need Express. Perfect. And now let's look at, we'll just use the index.js for our main file. And we'll say require Express. Need another S there. Let's go take a peek at the Express documentation. There's a little getting started guide here. Hello world. All right, so we're going to start with our basic Express app here. So we're going to have an app and app.get. So we know we need to have a, what did our specs say again? We need a form get page and a form post page. So form get, and I'm going to take a function that has a request and a response. And we have one that's very similar, form post, right? Okay. So then we've already got this form HTML written here. This is the get form. And what were the things that were supposed to be in our form? Artist name and country. Artist name, country. Just remove that last one. Form with method set to get. So let's rename this file from form.html. We'll rename this form get.html. And then we can, let's see. Just make a little more room here for us. There we go. So let's make another one called form post. And form post is going to look almost identical. It's just going to change get to post. All right, and they're both going to post to form submit. We can get rid of this and just give it just the path part of the URL. So it'll automatically post back to whatever URL this form was downloaded from. So we've got form get and form post. Let's go back into our index file. And I'm not going to use templates right now, just for the sake of simplicity while we're live coding this. And I'm just going to send the raw HTML back. Since we're not doing anything too terribly dynamic on these forms, I don't really need templates. And there should be, in the reference, right? I can response, send and render, send file. Transfers the file at the given path. The file's extension. So this is what we want. We can just send the file here. So this is sort of like render, except that it's not handling it as a template. It's just sending a raw file. So let's send file. It's got a bunch of options. Last modify headers, dot files. I don't really care about any of that stuff. And root is no default. So let's see if I can do this and just say form get. My guess is I'm going to have to be a little more clever about the path here. But let's try the simple thing first and see what happens. Oh, right. We're missing a really important part of our Express app, which is running the server. Which it's going to be one of these app.listen. And let's run it on 3000, just like everybody else. Function. And we'll say server. Get excited. Server is running. Okay. So node, run our server, running on port 3000. So let's give this a shot. Port 3000, form get. I'm have to be asked to specify root. Okay, so we do have to specify root when we're doing one of these send files. So we can see in their example, they were specifying root as dir name, which is just like the directory of this file. And then they're adding public to it, but we can just use directory name since we've just got it right in here. All right, so this option is going to be like that. Let's start our server again. Try this again. There we go. So there's our form with method set to get. And there's our form with method sent to post. So to recap, we just got these two HTML files right here in the same directory as our JavaScript file. And we just set up two routes for form get and form post that are fetching the appropriate HTML file and just returning that HTML. So that's a super simple way to render a couple of forms. And our forms are identical except for the method. Our HTML files, that is, are identical, and the forms are identical, except the method that's being set. One form is going to do a GET request, the other one's going to do a POST request. They're both going to submit to the same path. So let's write a, a route for that path. And we don't really want to do just a get or just a post, right? In our specs here, it says that the URL, this third route should be a route which handles the form submissions. So this URL should be submit form, and the HTTP method should be any, which means that no matter what the HTTP method is in a request, as long as it's going to this path, it should all be routed to a single route. So how do we do that in Express? Let's check the docs. That's going to be under application, right? So we know we have app.post, app.put. What's the app.all? So this method is like the standard app methods, except it matches all HTTP verbs. So the HTTP verbs are those actions, get, post, put, right? So we can say app.all. So regardless of what the HTTP verb is, regardless of what the action is, right? We can do this. And for now, let's response dot. We want to render JSON in our response, and I seem to feel like there's a shortcut for that. There is. So we can say app.render JSON, and for now, let's just put some sample stuff in here. So I'm just going to send this worked, this one object with a key worked and a value true as JSON, just to make sure things are working. So now if I submit this form, cannot post form submit. I got to restart my server. Let's try that one more time. Res is not defined. Another typo. Rect.response. Oh, Latoya, I'm sorry. I see you posted a question. I hope that wasn't there forever ago. Would line 8 need to be app.post, or would it remain app.get? That's a really good question. So the form that we're rendering, so when we go to form post, we are doing a get request to form post because we just want to load, we want to load this HTML file, right? So this is a get request, and the response to the get request is some HTML that contains a form, and the form, if submitted, will do a post request. But this, for form post, is going to be a get request because that's sort of the standard, kind of the default HTTP verb for just retrieving some HTML. Does that make sense? Cool. Any other questions? All right. So now we've got this route. Ooh, got some errors going on here. Res is not defined right. Okay, we fixed that by adding question response to our callback here. So now we should be able to submit this form. Let's see, artist name, Van Gogh. Spelling is not my strong suit. Country, I don't know, France probably. Submit. All right, so now when we run that, the form posts to this form submit endpoint, and we render this JSON response, right? And when we do response.json here, what's happening is, remember, there's all those headers with HTML, right, with HTTP. The browser specifies what sort of encodings it understands. There's also headers on the response, and one of the headers on the response indicates what type of encoding is used in the response. So often it's going to be something like HTML, right, would be the type of the response. But when we say response.json, the header that gets sent back actually indicates to the browser that this text it's about to receive is JSON. And that's why the browser is sort of giving me this, this nice formatting and syntax highlighting here, because it knows that this raw text that got sent back is JSON. And we can actually if I'm not mistaken, we can look at the network request. So here's this should be the response. And we can see the headers in here. And there's that content type header. It breaks it out for us and shows that the content type header is application/JSON. And that's something that Express is automatically adding into our headers for our response when we say response.json. Right, and we can see this is the raw text. All right, so we're close here. We're just not printing out what we want to be printed out. So we saw earlier that this post request is going to have some headers and then a body. And then in the body is going to be those input names and values in that sort of URI encoded string. So let's see how we would get at the body in an Express app. We're going to look at the API reference again. And look at the request, right? So we want to see how to get at the body of a request. And we see that there's this request.body method. Contains the key value pairs of data, but is by default is undefined. So this is going to contain the key value pairs of data submitted in the request body. But by default, it's undefined. It is populated when you use the body parsing middleware, such as body parser and Molter. So we can get at the body using request.body, but to do so, we have to add a body parser middleware that will sort of take that raw text that comes in the body of the HTTP request and actually parse it out and figure out, it knows how to read that string of key equals value ampersand next key equals next value. And it'll parse all that out and create just a JavaScript object for us with key value pairs and stick it in request.body. What I want to see is if there is a way that I can get the raw body or the raw request so we can see that. And I don't see an easy way to do that. So we will just use the body parser. So just to reinforce this, if we tried to return in our JSON here, body, and we'll use request.body. If we try and do this, by default, the way Express is set up, let's restart my server. By default, if I submit this, oh wow, it didn't seem to do anything at all. Did you even get that change? Or is it just because it's undefined, it's not showing up at all? Let's try this again. 1, 2. Something's not updating on the server. There it is. Okay. So body doesn't show up in that response at all. It may just be because of the way this is rendering. Nope. Let's look here. Yeah, so it's not showing up at all because the key is being set to undefined. So what we could also do is to string. Let's stringify. We should see that it's coming back undefined. Cannot read property to string of undefined. All right, so body is undefined. So to get it defined, we have to use the body parser middleware, which handily they gave us an example of right here. So we just do this const body parser, and then app.use. And there's a couple different ways to do this. Body parser.json, body parser.url encoded. And so this, you're using a different parser based on what encoding is being used in the body of the requests that are coming in, right? And like we said before, the encoding that's being used for these forms is URL encoded encoding. And that's that encoding that uses key equals value ampersand and then the next value. So this is the one that we want. Boom, boom, boom. So that body parser, app.use body parser, will install that middleware so that before Express starts to evaluate our routes and execute our routes, it'll take incoming requests and pass them through this body parser, which will look at the text of the body of the request and parse it, assuming that it's URL encoded, and then it'll populate request.body with an object with keys that represent the input names and values that represent the values that came in. So let's restart our server. Oh, one more thing. So we're still printing out request body there. Get rid of this thing.
Trevor, I think you need to install body parser 2 as a separate node package.
I do. That is correct. Thank you. Install, save body parser. Okay, so with that installed, the server doesn't crash, which is always a good thing. And then we can go to form post. And dude, someplace, commit. So now we see artist name and country coming in our request body, being parsed out of the body of our HTTP request into this nice JavaScript object, which we then turn into a JSON object and send back to the user. So that's how we get at the form elements that are being posted to the server. We use the right window. We use the body parser middleware, and then we just say request.body, and that'll give us this object. So we would be able to do things like request.body.country to get the country parsed in from the form. So that's super handy. So what happens if we do the form get version of this, and we pass in some artist name and some country? USA. So when we do that, we get a body object, right? But the body is empty. It's just an empty object. There's no key value pairs. And that's because, like we saw before, when we do a GET request, the parameters of the form don't get put in the body. They get attached to the end of the URL. And you can actually see that here in your browser. Your browser just sent a GET request to this URL, which contains, at the end of it, after this question mark, our URL encoded string of key value pairs. So we need to figure out how to get it that thing, which is another good time to go and look at the request documentation for Express. And we see that there is a request params method. And this refers to this is actually not what I want. Contains the path part of the. If you need to make changes to parameters, that does not look like what I want. I think we want query. Is there a query? Yes, request.query. There we go, sorry. So these things at the URL are usually referred to as query parameters, hence the confusion there. So the one you want is request.query. Request.query is going to give you access to an object just like request.body does, but it's going to have parsed out the query parameters for you from the query string. So let's take a look at that. We've got the body. Let's look at the query string, query params, and request.query will give us that object. I can take out this worked true thing now. Restart my server. And let's go back to form.get and add a couple of things in here. So the name, the place. So now we see we got query parameters. We still don't have anything in the body, right? Because this is a GET request. But these query parameters from the URL have been parsed and stuck in this query params object. The nice thing about, or the interesting thing about GET requests is that your browser by default will do a GET request. If you go to any URL, you just put a URL in your address bar, it'll do a GET request to that. So you can actually write in by hand any query parameters you want at the end of a URL, right? So I could say name equals Trevor, and I can add anything I want in here. I could add state equal California, ampersand 2 + 2 is 4. And whatever is in that query string, Express will parse out and put in query params for us, right? Let's go look at our specs again and see how close we are here. So our example response is supposed to be body params, and then the params from the body, and query params, and the params from the query. We are super close here. We just need to change this to body params, and this to query dash params. And that pretty much, make sure we didn't break anything. That should do it for us. So we can do a form get, and AAA, BBB. And that works in the get case. And if I do the form post, hello there, we should see those come in the body params. And I guess one last thing to note is that these things aren't mutually exclusive. You can have query parameters and body parameters. How would you do that, you might ask? So let's go to our form post. So because we're doing a post method to this form, we know that the inputs are going to get stuck in the body URL encoded, right? But the action just takes a URL, right? And there's nothing to stop us from just adding query parameters onto this URL. So some other param equals 42. And if we do that, let's see here, load the form post. And this is going to be the artist, and this is going to be the country name, right? If we submit this, we should see, now we're getting both, right? We're getting body params, which the form added to the body when it posted, and query params, which got parsed out of the URL that the form submitted to. So you will sometimes see both of these things being used at once. Conventions around these, usually you're using it just in sort of in HTTP convention, right? The get verb is indicating that you want to just get some document from the server. You're not intending to like cause any side effects. You're not telling the server to do anything. You're just saying, hey, I want to read this file, which would happen to be a web page or some JSON or whatever. Posts are used when you are posting some information to the server. You're sending information to the server. So a lot of times you'll see posts and body parameters used when you're trying to send information to the server. So you're, updating your user profile, or you're sending an email in Gmail or whatever. Anytime you're sending information to the server, you might see posts used. If you're just trying to get some information from the server, you'll see gets used. And so you'll see query parameters when you're requesting some information from the server, and you have some parameters that might change the way, give the server more information about like what information you want. So a good example of this would be Google. Y'all might have heard of this website called Google. So there's a search form here, and I can search for goats. And what we see here is that when I search for goats, even though that looked like a form, you can see that Google did a GET request here, right? It sent me to this URL that is /search, right? There's the path /search, and then there's a question mark, and there's this query parameter, this query string, right? And we can see that it's, I've got safe search sent to active because the internet is a terrifying place. There's a bunch of other stuff in here. I don't even know what it is. And then there's this Q parameter, Q equals goats. And that's my search string right there, goats. And there's some other ones here, OQ goats, and like a bunch of stuff I don't understand. Google's sending a whole bunch of information that is useful to itself somehow, no doubt. But you can see that because this is like a, hey, Google, I want to get information about this, it's putting all those parameters in the query string of a GET request. And again, we can just hack this thing directly, right? And I can get rid of all this extra mess probably. I would imagine that I could even just do this, search question mark Q equals puppies, and do a Google search for puppies that way, right? So that's a good example of the use of query string parameters and GET requests in the wild. Okay, well that pretty much gets us through exercise 2 in this module. Left as an exercise to the reader would be maybe using some sort of templating engine instead of hard coding all of your HTML like this. Might be an interesting thing to play with. But that's all I wanted to cover. Anybody have any questions about that or anything else in the time we have left? All right, well, cool. Thanks for showing up, everybody, and happy coding. I will see you all around in Slack. Bye.